So this is what we're talking about today, one of the most critical components of a really healthy garden soil. And it's one thing that once you add it to your garden, it can literally be in your garden for decades to come, possibly for the rest of your life. It's so important to add this to your garden. There's some important steps to do along the way. There's some critical mistakes many people make, and I'm going to tell you A to Z of exactly how to do this. So let's head into the greenhouse and I'll show you exactly how to do it. So guys, this is biochar, but it's not completed biochar as it's not finished the process that a gardener needs to go through to have it ready to go into their vegetable garden. But this is the beginning stage, and it's one of the most critical stages to have it in this state. This is hardwood, and it is very important to get it just right before you go to the next step. So I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. So there's two ways to make biochar. One is incredibly time and labor intensive, and the other is so simple that anybody could do it, even if you live in an apartment, small patio home, townhome. If you have a limited amount of space, don't have access to hardwoods, and maybe there's a ban on burning in your neighborhood. So the first way I like to do it is the simplest way, and it's going to take a huge amount of time off the process, and it's a whole lot easier. Now, once this biochar is completed through this process, you can add it to the garden, but inoculation is the most critical step on adding this to your garden. So if you add it in this state currently, it's going to actually be detrimental to your vegetable garden. So that process of inoculation is critical to move on to the garden. Now, I mentioned a more difficult way to do this. The difficult way to do this is obviously free because you collect the hardwoods from wherever you can get them and you burn them in your yard, but that is a lot more complicated than you would think. You're going to need, you could do it in an open pit, but then you're going to have to cover it, smother the fire, and cut off the oxygen before your hardwoods turn completely to ash. So that's a key to making this biochar is you have to stop the burning process before it's completed or you'll end up with nothing but ash. Ash is great to use in the garden. I've got a video I'll link about using potash in your garden. That's a great thing, but in this case, we're making biochar and not wood ash. So that's one thing that you can do in a metal trash can that's been specially designed. I'll eventually make a video about that. You can use a large metal burning ring, but again, that process is very labor intensive, and today's video is about doing it the simplest and easiest way for the average gardener. Now, the second reason I'm not doing the more labor-intensive way, which is, of course, like I said earlier, free, it's also a situation where I'm at where we are in a drought and there is an actual very large area statewide burn ban. So until that's lifted, I can't even make biochar outdoors without the possibility of a municipality coming in and telling me that I can't do it. So I'm going to show you the easy way today. So biochar is basically just a fancy word for charcoal, but it's wood that's been burned in a low oxygen environment till the only thing that's left is carbon, and it's not made it to the final stage of ash. So by restricting that oxygen, it prevents the wood from being completely consumed, and then all you're left with is that potash. Biochar is just another way of saying charcoal. But unfortunately in America, when Americans think of charcoal, we think about the briquette charcoals that have a lot of chemicals added. Some of them have things added to them to make them light, like kerosene, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about 100% pure hardwood with nothing added. I'll show you the bag that I'm using in a close-up of this charcoal. It is really nothing more than just wood. So guys, as you can see, that's what we're looking at, is just charcoal made out of pure wood. This is the particular brand I'm using. It's showing no chemicals, no fillers, and it's completely safe. So make sure if you do pick up a bag of this that it's just pure hardwood and nothing's been added to it. I'll put a link to one that you can have shipped to you, but if you look at your local Walmart or big box stores, usually you can find this in the barbecue section. So by using inoculated charcoal, which is then called biochar, you have a completely different product, and it is one of the best things you can use in your vegetable garden. So it just completely helps build your soil in your garden over time. And I mentioned this in a previous video about potash, but in South America, the natives for thousands of years have known about this. There's a specific name in Spanish, and I seem to forget that name, but it's about building the soil through adding this repeatedly, and you'll have a tremendously rich soil if you do it the right way. So I'm going to go over a lot of the benefits as far as it pertains to gardening and using biochar, but biochar is extremely porous, especially once you break it down, and it can hold a lot of water, and it holds even more nutrition. Now, in addition to drawing in moisture, it will also draw in nutrients very quickly, and that's also part of the inoculation process. but there will be microorganisms living in that that will be beneficial to your garden. So when I do make biochar for my garden, I don't break these large chunks down into a fine powder or even extra small pieces. I want to keep them about the size of an American dime or about ½ an inch in diameter so they can absorb those microorganisms and moisture for our vegetables. So there are some beliefs that biochar can last literally for centuries in a garden. Some archaeologists that have explored these sites in South America have found remnants of charcoal in the garden areas, and so that's one thing that once you add this to your garden, it could be there for the rest of your life. Now, most of the bagged biochar you're going to have access to is going to be hardwoods, but the actual best biochar, if you have access to dried or dead bamboo, burning it in that low oxygen environment actually is the best to use. This will have a lot more pore space in it, and it will have a lot more microbial life in it. So if you have access to a bamboo grove and you can get hold of the dead or drying bamboo, this can be the ideal thing to use as biochar. One thing to remember though, you don't want to burn green bamboo, as a lot of oxygen can be trapped inside of each one of these nodes, and when it heats up, it will literally explode like a firework. One last thing about bamboo for myself is I have several Japanese gardens throughout my yard, and I don't want to use bamboo as biochar because for me it's too valuable. I can make small fences and decorative things with it. So again, if you do have access to bamboo that's already dead, rotted, or dried in a bamboo grove, then that would be the ideal thing to use. But for me, no, I like to use it as a decorative item in the garden. So if you're interested in Japanese gardens, I'll put a link, a visual tour of the entire Japanese garden. But again, these are far too expensive for me just to burn them. So if you decide to go the bag route with biochar, you're going to have to go through the inoculation process first, and just remember that these crushed and placed directly in the garden will absorb a large amount of nutrients and a large amount of water, so it will be robbing it from your vegetables and ultimately being detrimental to most of your vegetable garden. Now, if you can't find the bagged hardwood, you can also go with the briquettes that have been made from biochar, but just make sure that it's 100% all natural, and the only binder in it could be cornstarch, not any artificial chemicals. Now, if the only thing you can find is the briquettes, you can crush them into an almost fine powder, put them in a 5-gallon bucket, and then add urine and water, maybe 1 cup of urine to maybe half a 5-gallon bucket of water, and create a slurry. Add that to your worm castings or worm composter or compost pile, and that can also help quite a bit. I'll put a link as to how to make a really good worm composter up here. So about urine in the garden, I have a video I specifically made about using urine and how to use it in your garden, and I'll link that as well. For the initial phase of using your charcoal and turning it into biochar is to crush it into that small pieces about ½ an inch in diameter. You want to make sure that you wear an N95 mask, and also if you don't have an N95 mask, you can lightly mist it as you go through this process, and that'll cut way down on the dust and any chance of inhaling it. So you don't want that in your sinuses. It's not toxic, but it's like standing near a fire pit or an open flame and there's a lot of smoke. It's just not good for you. So the best thing you can do, wear a mask or use your misting nozzle on your hose to make sure you can keep the dust down as you break it down. We're going to head outside and I'm going to show you exactly the tool I use to break it down. So guys, the tool I use is an 8x8 soil tamper, heavy iron bottom, and then a long pole, and we're just going to crush it down, and I'm going to mist it as I go to keep down the dust coming up to my face. Now, crushing it by hand is really labor intensive, and as you can see, we still have some rather large pieces. We have some that's about the right size, a little bit larger than a dime, but there's a lot of mixture here. I'd have to sort this out and only use the smallest pieces to inoculate. But what I want to say is there's another method. If you have an electric wood chipper, you can run these through maybe once or twice and get them down to the right size very quickly with one of those, or a gas-powered wood chipper for that. So if you have asthma or any lung issues, I wouldn't recommend doing the breaking it down yourself or burning it. I would recommend buying Humichar. I'll put a link down below in the description where it's already made for you. It's a lot safer. I just wouldn't recommend anybody with those type of issues going through this process, because even when you're misting and you're doing everything else, there's still a chance that you could have an asthma attack or other issues related to your condition. Now, the inoculation phase is super simple. I've taken some of the smaller pieces of charcoal. Some of them are a little bit bigger than I'd like them to be, but we're going to add it to a 5-gallon bucket, half filled with water. We're going to let that settle just for a second, but we're going to need to mix it because most of your charcoal, the larger pieces, are going to be floating at the top, so we want it to be well mixed before we add our next component. Okay, I'm going to mix our charcoal with our small shovel here, our mixing device. Okay, and the next thing, we're going to be adding roughly a gallon of compost. Now, I'm also adding about 3 or 4 handfuls of worm castings of this. I've got fresh worm castings, but I don't want to disturb my composter because I just set up a new one the other day. So if you have a composter, add some worm castings. If you don't, I'll put a link down below to these worm castings, and you get these really quickly. So we're going to add the compost and worm casting mixture, about 1 gallon roughly, to our 5-gallon bucket. Now we're going to mix the two together so that process can take place. We just want to make sure that our compost that we added and our worm castings are well mixed into the water. Now, it is really labor intensive to break down that charcoal, especially if it's the large type that I bought, the extra large. I should have probably went with a regular size or maybe a smaller size charcoal. But you can double bag the charcoal you buy, put it in a contractor's bag or some type of heavy duty bag, not a standard trash bag, but some type of really heavy duty bag that's puncture resistant. Put it in the driveway of your house, wherever you can do this, and run over it with your car 3 or 4 times. It sounds silly, but it's a super easy way, and it's not near as labor intensive of having to break it down with your tool there that I demonstrated. So this would be a lot easier if you have some heavy duty trash bags and you just do it like that in your driveway. Now, I mentioned adding the slurry if you use the charcoal briquettes to a composter, and this is a composter that I demonstrated earlier. It's really cheap to make and it works really well. I actually have 2 types of composters. I just have a standard composter and a vermicomposter, which is basically a worm composter. I'll link the video of how to make this type of just standard food composter from the kitchen up above. Now, the slurry you made from the larger briquettes, you're going to allow this to sit for 5 to 7 days and allow the biochar or the charcoal to absorb the nutrients from the worm castings and the compost you've added. So it's going to take close to a week for that to take place. Now, one of these 5-gallon buckets that you make should cover 1 4x8 bed. I have raised beds in my garden, so I should be able to add one of these to the top 6 inches of soil. And per bag, I'm trying to think, I believe that was a 20-pound bag. It should cover about 3 of those beds. So for 2 bags, I could cover 6 beds. For 3 bags, of course, it would be another 3. So just remember that you can go a long way with just 1 bag. It's not going to cover 1 bed. You're going to get multiple beds or multiple areas in your garden per bucket you make. So some critical rules that you have to do is you cannot forget to add your compost and your worm castings to the mixture. If you just try to inoculate it with water, you're missing a very critical step in the process. If you do decide to make it yourself and not go with the bagged charcoal, another critical step you're going to need to remember to do is don't water it to put the fire out to try to save the charcoal from turning to complete ash. You'll rinse out a lot of the minerals and nutrients, and that is a step you don't want to do. You want to cover it with something and put the fire out. If you have a burn barrel or a burn ring, you can cover it through that method, or if you have a trench method, you can just cover it with soil to put it out. But remember, don't water it to put it out because that will leach out a lot of the minerals from your biochar. So if you're planning on adding this to your composter or a compost pile, you might wait up to 2 weeks in this bucket before you add it to make sure all the nutrients have been absorbed and there's no more chance of it affecting your compost in a negative way. Now, if you collect rainwater or if you have access to pond water, that's even better to use over tap water for the inoculation process. Now, an alternate item you can add to your charcoal if you don't have access to compost is you can actually add urine, compost tea, or an organic fertilizer, and that will take the place of the compost and the worm castings. Now, speaking about worm castings in your vermicomposter or your worm composting system, you can add about 1 gallon of this per. My worm composter is about 2.5 by about 3.5 by about 2 feet tall. It's a large tub. I linked that video earlier. So I would say about 1 gallon of this. You don't want to totally saturate it with it, but about 1 gallon well mixed in will help the worms work even better, because the microorganisms along with the worms will break down the waste products from your kitchen even faster. So by using this inoculated finished products around your vegetables will actually become larger, be more productive, and you'll have better harvest each year. And so it's really one of those things in the vegetable garden that is indispensable, that every gardener should be using, but most gardeners don't. So once the burn ban in my state is lifted, because it's been, at one point it was statewide, it was a extremely dry end of summer, and so I want to demonstrate how to make biochar from limbs and things that you might collect around your yard. And it's a simple way to do it, but it's not in an open burn pit. It's a unique method, and I'll do that video probably in the next 2 to 3 months over the winter when the temperatures are a lot lower. It's really difficult doing this in the summertime when the temperatures are so hot. It makes it miserable to create it. So wintertime is a great time to create biochar, and that's what we're coming up on. So guys, I suppose that is just the tip of the iceberg on using biochar in your garden, because there's so much information out there, but it is really one of the most critical things you can do. So if you found anything helpful, useful, or you like the video, or you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe, and I really appreciate you watching. Have a great day.